Hi guys, thank you for joining us today. As he said, my name is Stephanie. I'm the Director of Operations at Austin Pets Alive. Been there about a year and a half. Prior to that, I worked at the largest intake shelter in Wyoming, which for context was 6,000 animals. And prior to that, a couple shelters in Michigan. So all in all, been in animal welfare for about 10 years. Really excited to be here today. Katie is our surprise guest today. She is not on the program, but she's here anyway. So do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, my name's Katie. I do all of our dog intake coordination, kind of the initial gatekeeper of all of our intake requests. I have been doing this for almost 4 years. I was a volunteer for about a year and a half before that, and previously lived a whole nother life teaching miniature humans how to miniature human appropriately. And most recently in a special ed setting, which is not that much different from the dogs we see, and kind of how we interact with them. So I've been doing this for almost 4 years and love it very much.
Yay! So we're here.
Here we are.
Before we dive in, just a quick note, this is only a 45-minute session. We could talk about this all day long. So we have sort of highlighted some really high-level talking points here. We're not going to be able to dive real deep into everything. That being said, there are a lot of sessions over the weekend that will cover a lot of these topics much more in depth. So hopefully this will give you an overview, give you an idea of the things that you want to try to tackle more head-on, and then you can go on to future sessions to learn that kind of stuff. So we are also happy to answer questions at the end. We're going to try to get through this so we can get to questions. We're also both very happy to answer questions after the fact or by email later, or however you need to get in touch with us. So if we skip over something that you wish we would have gotten into a little bit more, I apologize. No offense. We're just trying to get as much information in front of you guys as we can. So
there's also a lot of other sessions this weekend that touch the things more in depth than we're going to be able to touch them today. So this is kind of, like Stephanie said, just like that brief overview. Yep. And don't worry, we're going to tell you which sessions are good ones that are related to this.
Some of them. Anyways.
They're all good.
Okay. So obviously there are many reasons why your kennels might be full. This is sort of just a few things we threw up there as to reasons why. So we're going to be focusing on today how to handle your temporary needs. There are a lot of these that will apply for more permanent situations. Things like you've taken on a new contract and so now you have twice as many intakes. Maybe you're in a shelter that was built 40 years ago and it was just not meant to house as many animals as your community has now. So there's a lot of these things that if you can build your programs will apply in the future as well. So I also want to touch on capacity for care really quickly. This is coming up a lot this weekend, and so we're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I think it's really important to talk about this because capacity for care is often misconstrued as, or used as an excuse, essentially, to kill animals in order to stay under your self-prescribed capacity for care. And while the kennels in your facility are one of the places that you can house animals, they are not the only place. And so really it is your responsibility as an organization to expand your capacity for care to care for the number of animals that are coming into your facility, not to artificially reduce the population in your facility to fit into what the box that you think they should fit in. So if you have 40 kennels in your facility, you have 50 dogs that need a kennel, that does not mean you kill 10 of those dogs in order to fit into those 40 kennels. It means that you should be trying to find the programs and the services that you need to make available to be able to accommodate all 50 of those dogs. So again, I'm not going to go too far into this, but this is a really important point. So we'll sort of start from that foundation and move forward.
All right, so the main kind of chunk to accommodate for these temporary needs is to get your dogs out faster and alive. So the big piece is asking for help and being super transparent in your ask. Being completely across the board, transparent with what you're asking of the public, of your partners, on social media, and making sure that that messaging is the same across all of those boards. So saying, we are flooding. We need to move 50 dogs. Can you help? They're available for adoption and fostering. Can you take them temporarily? Being super clear and then giving options. So we need foster homes, we need adoptive homes, we need, not in this example, but in an example of we're helping a hoarding case, we're taking 40 dogs from this one property, so we're gonna need more food, we're gonna need more bowls, we're gonna need more people to clean up where they're hanging out. All of those things, being super transparent in your ask will help people who abroad, please help us, is not enough of a call to action for them. They need something that is super concrete that they look at and say, oh yeah, I can do that. I can order some leashes on Amazon and have them go over there, or I can swing by PetSmart and get some leashes and some bowls and bring them over. I can't clean kennels today, but I can do that. So being really clear about what your need is, because people want to help, and some people need more concrete action items than we need help.
And anything else that you are going to do after that, none of it matters if you won't tell your community what you need from them. So it is the number one most important thing that you can do is just let people help you. You have to maybe put your ego aside. You maybe have to work with people who in the past have not been kind to you on social media or have actively worked against you or whatever that might look like. You have to get past that if you're gonna help the animals in your care. You just have to put those things aside and let everyone get in there and do the parts of it that they can help you with. The social media, using your social media, super important. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The sort of first step, obviously, in actually getting the dogs out faster is being able to run adoption promotions. Again, this is a topic there's going to be more on later, so we're not going to go too far into it, but this is super important. If you can even temporarily reduce your fees, waive your fees, do a name your own price promotion, put a cute name on it, give it a cute theme, whatever it is that you need to do, whatever you find that your community responds to, that's what you need to put in front of them. And you also need to make the animals accessible to your adopters. And so if you don't have adoption hours that are accessible on a regular basis, then maybe this is a time that you can test that out. Maybe this is when you can go to the boss and say, hey, I know we normally close at 4 p.m., but we'd really like to stay open until 7 p.m., even Monday to Friday, just to put these animals in front of more people. So that's a super important piece. And then you can also pair up with other organizations in your community to try to do joint promotions or work together to be able to move the animals through your care, and we'll talk about that later as well.
And the thing about any of those items that's super important is to track them. So especially if you're working in a municipal environment where you have a lot of restrictions, getting and gathering that data and then sharing that data with the powers that be can help. You can say, well, we were able to do this number of adoptions in this many days. We were able to bring in this many dollars in this number of days because we did this. It's worth the cost of a staff member staying until 7, as an example.
So before we kill too much time, the next talking point is doing some temporary intake diversion. I'm not going to go really deep into that because there are a ton of intake and animal control sessions this weekend. But if there's things that you can apply even temporarily, like diverting your intakes by asking finders to hold on to them or take them back to their homes, asking your officers to return in field, posting the strays proactively on your social media so that people can come look at their pictures and see if it's their animal.
We did it.
Waiving reclaim fees, delaying reclaim fees, allowing them to pay later, whatever it is. If the fee is the holdup, let it go. Let the money go. So again, many sessions on that later. You can dig into that.
One of the biggest ways that you're going to get the most animals out is by short-term and emergency fosters. So making your process as easy as possible. We learned this during Hurricane Harvey, where our process was a lot clunkier than it is now. You had to wait and do a phone. You had to do a phone interview with a person before you could take a dog home. And it turns out that's not terribly efficient for mass applications at once. making all animals available for foster, even your highly adoptables, even your puppies, even your kittens, all of the things can go to foster, because at the end of the day, you need space. So get the creatures that are in your space out of your space so you can take the next creatures that need to come in right now. Because especially some of those fosters are going to turn into full-time fosters, foster until adoption, or they're going to adopt these animals. We see that a lot, especially with these emergency pleas, where we do a public push and people come in who aren't already part of our system. They say, yeah, sure, I can foster a dog for 2 weeks. Sure. And then they're like, yeah, you're never going to see this dog again. This is mine. We're all set. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. And that's the goal. And now we're going to talk even more about that. When you have an emergency coming, figuring out what you're going to do ahead of time is the most helpful. And this varies case by case depending on what the situation is. Communicating those specific needs to the public, we're going to talk about transparency a lot because it's very important. We dealt with a case recently where we took the ask was to take 40 dogs from an individual who reached out to us for help. And what we were able to do is get all of those animals up and viewable so people could come forward and say, hey, I want this dog. That's also how we got them out to rescues. I just combined two stories, but either way, getting all that info out and then people can come forward because they are now invested in one of these animals that they saw. They've already kind of stepped forward and committed to taking that animal, and then they're in it. They're like, okay, cool, this dog's coming and it's gonna be mine, and I'm so excited to take it home. We already got a bed and bowls and stuff. And then streamlining that sign-up process is super important, and creating and communicating day of plans among the affected teams. So depending on the size of your organization and the number of staff you have and volunteers that you have, it really kind of varies who's doing what. In our iteration of this, we have different people doing each of these bullet-pointed responsibilities, but if you have fewer people, you likely have one person doing 4 or 5 of these things, because if you're dealing with it on a smaller scale, you can. So this is all of the piece. So the thing about transparency is that it's important for that to also apply internally. We sometimes forget the importance of internal transparency as well as external. So make sure that everybody on your team is aware of what's happening. This is the list of things that our foster team at APA uses when we're prepping for an emergency push. These are the things, we figure out who's doing what, and we kind of go from there. Do you want more details on that?
No, not if you don't have more.
No, I do not.
So this is a recent example of a plea that we put together. Austin Animal Center was desperate for space pretty much all last summer, and they hit a really breaking point in the middle of the summer. And so they came to their 2 partners in Austin, which was us at Austin Pets Alive and Austin Humane Society, and said, we need help. We need to move at least 100 animals out of our facility like yesterday. So whatever we can do, please help us. And so we got together and decided to do a joint promotion, and we went straight to the public and told them exactly what we needed and exactly what was going on. And so we were able to go out and say, our goal is to move 500 animals into adoptive or foster homes this weekend, or AAC is going to have to start making some really ugly decisions. And so, and it worked. We had people, it was great. It was the same deal across all shelters. There was no competition. Everybody had the same end goal in mind, and we met and exceeded that goal. So we try to do joint promotions more proactively throughout the year as well, but this is a way in which it can apply and work in a crisis situation.
And this particular crisis, this particular push really was because it was the week before July 4th. So we know historically, especially here, that post July 4th intake is huge because dogs are like, oh my God, the world's ending. Why aren't you worried? And they leave to try to figure out why the world's ending and end up at the shelter. So this was a proactive push on their part, identifying that there was going to be this need and figuring out how to relieve some of that space stress in order to accommodate for this planned and already known large intake.
Again, intake diversion strategies. This is just a few ideas that you can apply temporarily to try to slow down the intake of animals into your facility. If you are already out of cages, ideally you don't want more walking in the door. And so at the same time that you're trying to push them out through adoption promos, that you're trying to push them out through foster pleas, you want to try to slow them down from coming in as well. So obviously when you're in places where you have contracts and you have to take in strays, we're not saying don't fulfill your contract. What we're saying is there are ways that you can slow down, delay, or divert those animals from coming into your facility. You can change some of your animal control policies, try to implement return in field even temporarily. We used to do this in Wyoming all the time. Try to see if you can get people to come back in a week or 2 weeks or however long you think you need. Try to divert them to another rescue. If you have a Great Pyrenees walk in the door and you know Peer Rescue is going to grab it anyways, just try to not be the middleman and just send them right to Peer Rescue. So, there's no reason that you have to hold those animals in your facility if you know someone else is going to take them anyway. So, many, many sessions this weekend on intake. So, that's as much as we'll say about that.
Creative housing is my favorite thing. So, the first thing in the housing piece is to assess how you're using your space. Are you using all of your kennels appropriately? Are you storing newspapers in one of them? Are you storing food in one of them? Yoga mats, maybe, beds?
Do you have a 7-pound Yorkie in a 6x6 kennel?
Yeah, things like that. Wouldn't necessarily be classified as appropriate use of a kennel. Are you pairing dogs when you can? If your kennels are big enough and you can handle everybody safely, are you pairing as much as possible? Are you using offices, meet and greet rooms, other alternative spaces, like perhaps you have outbuildings, like a barn or a truck port or a garage or a shed or a bathroom? We've done that.
We've definitely done that.
Multiple times.
One night.
Super short term, just
one
overnight.
night.
It's fine. He was great. It's a nice alternative to something like a crate for dogs that you might have in your care that can't or shouldn't be crated. Think of other ways that you can house them. Again, post-Harvey, we needed space, so instead of the 1 or 2 dogs that we had in offices, we booted them to kennels and pulled, my memory has something like 5 dogs into connected offices, and they were highly social dogs. We pulled them from their kennels, opened 5 kennels, and they just lived their best playgroup life in our offices, and we sort of got work done. It doesn't matter, they were great. So using crates in conference rooms, multi-purpose rooms, is another great way for temporary housing. Figuring out kind of how to house them. Again, we do this in conference rooms, multi-purpose rooms. We happen to have a barn that we use sometimes. When we were talking about this, we could also, if we ever needed to, use our truck port area as well because it's covered. So we could use that space as well to temporarily house dogs. The thing that is the most important about any sort of temporary housing is to have an exit plan. Figure out where those animals are going to go and how you're going to get them out of there as soon as possible. In this 500 homes push, we pulled, you guys don't
50?
remember the numbers, do you? It's like 50-ish, between 50 and 60 dogs in 24 hours. We did 8 transports that day. And by the next day, all of them were in either foster homes or back into regular housing. Because we had a plan as soon as a dog left a kennel, a dog came from an alternative location into that kennel. we did a quick clean and in you go, to really get those guys to help condense back into your normal operating procedure. So you're able to kind of condense back to your normal day-to-day, what everybody's used to, as quickly as possible. And then other things that we also learned, we learned a lot of things at Harvey, y'all. Find alternative housing offsite. See if someone in your network has a warehouse, an empty warehouse, an empty, an empty building of any sort, an empty pole barn, an empty horse stable, an empty dog kennel, because those people exist. They likely exist, and if you're super clear in your ask of hey, we got these dogs coming, and man, we need a place for them to go. You never know who's going to see those posts. You never know who has a sister, who has a best friend, whose dad owns a thing that who loves animals, and it's yeah, sure, here, have this thing. Here you go. It happens. I promise. It happens. It doesn't only happen here. It happens. You just have to be super clear in your ask. Otherwise, your sister doesn't talk to her friend about the need that you have. So having that super clear makes it super helpful.
In that asking for help too, it's really important that you're reaching out to your public, to your volunteers, whatever, and making sure they know where you need help too. When we had dogs in the barn, it didn't mean our staff just had to go somehow in their day figure out how to care for 50 more dogs. We added more volunteer shifts, we let them know what we needed, and we made sure that we still had all the needs of those dogs covered while they were in there. They still got their 2 walks a day, they still got their meals, they still got fed. All of that stuff was able to be maintained while the dogs were in that location, so that's really, really important.
And because we do what we do, we see things like this pretty regularly in different forms, so we now have a plan to handle these situations, and we are really good now about being okay, cool, here are the options. Which direction does this particular circumstance need to go?
Okay, so we've talked about moving them out faster, we've talked about slowing them down from coming in, and we've talked about getting creative with the space that you have already under your control, and or finding space elsewhere that you can use temporarily, getting creative with the animals that are still left in your care. So the most important thing at this point, and presumably why you're all here, is that you want to be prepared for next time this happens, right? Because it's never just one little space crisis and then never again, right? This is a recurring issue. And so there are things that you can do now to be prepared for those situations in the future. And honestly, some of these things will keep you from having as bad of an issue in the future at all, or hopefully, ideally, help you mitigate the problems altogether. So if you are not super certain about how many dogs should reasonably fit in your kennels alone, this is a really quick calculation that you can do to figure out how many kennels in your facility you need to be able to house the intake that comes into your organization. So this is based on roughly a 2-week length of stay, which is an ideal, I realize, for many. But this is how you can calculate that. So for example, if you have 1,000 dogs that come in annually, this is your total annual intake. You want to be able to have at least 1 kennel available for every 25 dogs that come into your care. And then that will tell you how many you reasonably need to have. If you do not have that many kennels, you need to figure out how you're going to fill those gaps, because that's your first problem, right? And many of you may already know that your shelter doesn't handle the number of animals that need your help anymore. So filling the gaps, you need to have more adopter access. If you are open from 11 to 3 on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and that's the only time that people can come in and meet your animals, of course your adoption numbers are going to be low. You have to figure out how to get them in front of people, whether that's off-site events, whether that's going to Petco or PetSmart or whoever will have you, really. In the early days of APA, we would sit with a trailer in a grocery store parking lot and see who wanted to adopt our animals. And so you need to get those animals in front of people however you can. And then you need to establish and or grow a foster program. This is going to be essential to your space. Your foster capacity is essentially infinite. And so that is the only way. You're not going to get $1 million donation every year to add 20 more kennels. You're not going to be able to keep expanding your physical space. And so you have to expand your space through foster programs. There are sessions on this later. I really wish we could get into this now. But unfortunately, we just don't have that much time. But this is so important to make sure that you can expand your capacity. And this can be for anything. This can be for your medical dogs. This can be for your neonates. This can be for your big dogs. This can be for your behavior dogs. There's all kinds of, fosters will take on anything you ask them to. You just have to ask them. So you want to make sure you're establishing and or growing your foster program. You also need to make sure you're establishing and or growing a hopefully already existing rescue program. There are sessions on this later too, but this is really important, and that means you also need to have someone in your organization who's responsible for that function. Doesn't have to be a staff, could definitely be a volunteer, could be a Friends of organization, it could be anybody in your community that wants to help you make those connections and figure out who's gonna take those animals. Let them help you. And then identify alternate housing for the future, right? Don't wait until you've got 20 dogs sitting in your intake lobby trying to find somewhere to put them. Figure that out now. Figure out what that looks like. Prep yourself. Figure out how many crates you need to get. That's another plea you can put out in front of people. We want to have 30 crates on hand at any given time so that we can put our animals in alternate locations. So try to identify those in advance. That's something that it's like a puzzle. So it's kind of fun to, to get creative with that. You also need to build your support system. If you don't already have a volunteer program, you should definitely establish one. Or grow your existing foster program. We have plenty of people who don't necessarily volunteer on a daily basis or a weekly basis, but they do come out and help when we need extra help when we're in a crisis. They'll come out and just do the laundry so that staff can do something else. They'll come out and do those, sort of basic tasks so that the people who are more well-trained can do those more hands-on care tasks. And so this is super, super important to start growing that program now so that you have a larger base of people that you can go out to when you run into an issue. We also really encourage you to establish your local media partnerships now. Don't wait until there's a problem to try to go get a news station to pick up your story, or try to go get a business partner, try to go find a business partner to help you either share your message or give you some space or give you some items. Establish those relationships now, and then again, they're there when you need them. We have lots of partnerships with the Austin news stations, and we know we can go straight to them if we need something urgent to get out in front of the public. So, and those are relationships that we're constantly cultivating so that we can make sure that they're there when we really need them. And then growing your social media following. This is another thing you don't want to be trying to do the day of. You don't want to be waiting till the time when you need them to help you to try to go find them and get them to follow your Facebook page first. So do some engagement activities. Try to get more people on your page now so that, again, you have a larger base that you can reach out to when you do need help. And then establishing your permanent policies to reduce intake. We won't talk about these again, but they're there. These are things that you can do to help try to divert your intake earlier in the process. Be proactive, anticipate your needs. Use your data to track your population trends. Figure out when you're, if you can look at your numbers and say, God, every March we get this huge influx of animals, or every August our adoptions drop off. Whatever that looks like, get ahead of it. If you know you're going to hit a traditional influx, do an adoption promo 2 weeks in advance. If you know that adoptions are going to drop off, try to slow down your intake. Try to do those adoption promos in advance so that you can get ahead of the need for that space. And then obviously establishing all your protocols in advance. Again, these are not things you want to be writing when you're in the moment, and so work on those now. Figure out an emergency plea SOP, what each person on your team is going to be responsible for when you do have to go out and do an emergency plea. Write your standards of care guidelines. If you don't already have something written down, do that, and then that gives you some basis to start with when you do have animals in crates, when you do have animals in alternate housing. That makes sure that's your very basic standards of care that says, even if this dog is in a crate in the barn, he's still going to get 2 walks today. He's still going to get water and food and all those things that are needed just to maintain your standard baseline of care. And then another idea is that you can create sort of a kennel space alert system for yourself, so you can work ahead of time on where your sort of danger points are, and implement steps of your plan when you hit each of those points. So don't wait until you're at 105% capacity, try to get ahead of the game. So this is a really great dashboard that we are very impressed with at Dallas. We're really excited about this.
During Dallas, humans, thank you.
This is on the website.
Super
Everyone
awesome.
can see this. So the community knows exactly what's going on at the shelter on any given day. And then you can take this information, it doesn't have to be this sophisticated, but you can take this information and say, okay, when we hit yellow, we're gonna do A, B, and C. When we hit orange, we're gonna do D, E, and F. And when we hit red, we're gonna do the rest of these things. And so that, again, it doesn't have to be even that complicated. It can be, when we have 20 kennels left, we're going to do this. When we have 10 kennels left, we're going to do this. So you want to get ahead of that, and you can create a system with those those temporary items that work for you, and try to get ahead of it.
This is easily accessible, super easily accessible on their website.
Yes.
I didn't know it existed until earlier this week, and super cool.
It's a really clean way to present the data for the public. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is just sort of a rundown. I could not fit everything on one slide, but there are so many other sessions this weekend that can give you more details on the things that we've talked about today. So this is just a few that I pulled out. I know we're doing a lot of stuff on animal control and intake this session. There's some marketing and communications pieces. Those are really important. And then all kinds of foster, adoption, outcome related topics as well. So please check those out, and hopefully there's something today that you're looking to get more information on that you can dig into when you get into those future sessions. Cool? Good.
We did it.
We made up for time. Okay, we have 10 minutes though, I think?
Yep.
We have 5 minutes. Okay.
Oh, that's
Talk fast. Any questions?
Yes.
Where did you get your number for the 1 for every 25?
That's based on an average 2-week length of stay. So that's assuming that that dog's only going to be in that kennel for 2 weeks.
And it came from a bunch of different, different large intake shelters.
Yes.
So we narrowed it down to not show you that based on 10,000
AMPA
dogs?
based it on Austin, Kansas City, and a third community. So they're larger communities. Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
cut it down to make it be a little bit more. It is on the Dallas, so what I did is I just Googled Dallas Animal Services, and then on their like drop down, it is an option. It is literally its
Daily
own
report
link.
card.
It's called Daily Report Card, and it is just right there, and they update it every day.
We like it. We're very jealous.
It's really cool, super jealous. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Yes?
Yeah.
So coming from Wyoming, I'm assuming that was a pretty rural environment.
Very, very rural, yes.
Have you found that you've had to customize some of the normal strategic planning being in a rural environment where the population's a little bit smaller?
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I was in Cheyenne, so it's about as metro as you can get in Wyoming. Population was about 60,000 people in the city. We covered the whole county. So, I mean, there are definitely, and our intake was over average for that number, for that amount of that population. To be honest, we were not employing all of these strategies. And one of the reasons why I'm not there. But we were certainly trying to do things like proactive adoption promotions. The people are still there. I know it's a little more challenging. You just have to reach further. If you feel like your community can't handle that number of animals, you need to reach further. Your adoption, foster, promotional reach should be beyond what your intake reach is, because that's the only way you're going to offset those numbers. I think all those strategies still apply, though. You just need to get that further reach. So establishing those relationships in advance, growing your following, reaching out to rescue partners further away than you think they might be interested. It can't hurt to ask, right? Yep. So, and in those cases, you can set up longer transports and things like that. There are sessions about transports this weekend too. So all that information is out there. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's been your experience? What's been your experience in kenneling dogs outside?
Well, we're lucky we're in Texas.
Right, so
For
we
one.
live on the surface of the sun, so for better or for worse. Our kennels are indoor-outdoor. If you have a chance to come on Monday to do a tour or to swing by while you're here, please do it, because we are in the 40-plus-year-old shelter that Stephanie... 60-year-old shelter that Stephanie a million-year-old shelter that Stephanie referenced earlier. It was not built to do what we do. It was built to hold dogs for 3 days and then euthanize them. It was not built to hold the number of dogs, the types of dogs that we are housing in this facility, but we are doing awesome stuff in a less than awesome environment. And one of the things that we talk about all the time is because we get compared all the time to the city shelter, which is newer and has like beautiful blue tile and beautiful AstroTurf. And the difference, air conditioning and like indoor doors. They're like real fancy. Definitely go check them out too. The difference is the space that they're in matters less if they aren't spending a lot of time in it. Our animals are getting out at least twice a day for good outings, usually more. Our dogs, social dogs, are out of their kennels for hours every day. So getting them kind of in and out as much as possible. And then we have all kinds of strategies to deal with kind of the temperature and stuff.
That's what I want to talk about,
ultimately
is
the
temperature
question.
control stuff, because our kennels are not very well temperature controlled, and so we've had to do a lot of stuff to get ahead of our old facility. So we reached out last winter. We had problems with our heaters, and this works in a barn or anywhere else too. There are companies where you can rent essentially like diesel powered. They're meant for construction sites, and so they have these like long tubes where it's just pumping out heat, and that will heat up your normally outdoor space. So whether that's a barn or something like that. Same thing with air conditioning. We don't have air conditioning in our kennels, so we utilize a system of swamp coolers, fans, misters, all that stuff to maintain the temperature in the kennels at a reasonable rate. So you just need to get creative and look out there for what those more practical options are in your outdoor environment. Is that okay? 1 minute.
We can handle one more question.
Anything? Nothing? Yeah.
You don't, your state doesn't require you to inspect your fosters, right?
Nope. No. I know. That's, yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So sorry, the question
said
from this
she's-
lovely lady
yes.
in the front here was, state doesn't require you to check your foster homes. No, ma'am.
No,
No, ma'am, it does not.
they
She has to do it
don't.
twice a year. So what state? Georgia.
Yeah, we've been running, our instructors have been
Yeah,
running
that's
into
gonna be
that
hard.
a little bit. It's not something we have a lot of answers for right now, unfortunately, except to try to
Maybe-
get that law knocked down.
Yeah, that would be
It's
hard.
my. And I mean, that just means you have to put more resources behind that, right? Because when you're in a place where you're like, we're trying to not do home checks, and now you're forcing us to do home checks, and this is a lot of resources. Yeah, it's tough. We don't have to work on that, unfortunately. Cool?
Okay, cool.
We're good?
Thanks,
Have we
guys.
sucked up all of our time? Okay, thank you guys very much.